Sam
Great.
Bernard, it's a pleasure to have you on $2 Late Fee.
Oh, thank you. In all honesty, I adore your podcast. It's my time. It's from when I was, busy and being a complete idiot in the movie business. And I told you where I live, and I don't know. I mean, there used to be this was just like a thing with me. Right across the street, there's a Habit there now, if you know that, right?
Yes.
So what used to be there was a warehouse.
Like the music store, right?
Yeah, well, right. And I used to rent videos there all the time, and it's literally like 90 feet away, and I was always paying late fees. I just, for some reason, I mean, I just couldn't, I would actually sometimes just drive over there, and then 90 feet away, it just would be sort of, but I spent an awful lot of time in there, in that store, and paid a lot of late fees.
From what I remember, Warehouse was notorious for jacking their late fees up. They were pretty pricey.
Oh yeah. They were, I didn't really do Blockbuster until later on, until I realized that there was more selection there, but because it was so close. I mean, it was easy to walk over there and get a tape. I just remember, like when I first saw the name of your podcast, I'm going, that's what I did every time. I was paying late fees all the time, and had it not been so close, I probably would have been more, diligent about it, right?
Well, I think you are one of our first guests on our show that has acknowledged those late fees that they had to pay, because oftentimes we're asking our guests, did you have to pay a late fee? And I don't think so.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was decades ago. I tell
right?
you, but they were there, and God, my goodness, and having gotten more involved, especially in the '90s when the home video market, really, I mean, it was big in the '80s, but it was new, and no one knew what was to come.
No,
really, and everything was very confused. But in the '90s, it matured, and so you became sophisticated about a little bit more, hopefully, about the business and how it worked, and how much money those stores were making,
right.
and as opposed to what they would get back, what the studios would get back. The stores had all the power.
Yes.
I mean, they had all the power. They could, they could do what they wanted. They could charge what they wanted. And, tapes were what, $109, right? Back,
Very expensive.
Yeah,
we just had the owners and the people. We just had the people behind Vidiots on our show.
I love Vidiots. It was such a great store.
It's coming back. It's coming back to the Eagle Rock location. They obviously had to move, but it is coming back. And Vidiots, both owners talked about the fact that physical media is so important, because so much of the digital media is changing. And you're not able to find a lot of these movies that we loved from the 80s out there today, on a digital platform.
And it's becoming harder because it's just, the business has become, more cluttered, and, with new stuff. And so it was, a few years ago, there was quite a demand. And I mean, I've had some problems. These were 90 movies. But like a movie I did with Luca, and called Dark Tide, and then we were like,
Luca Bercovici for the audience.
Luca Bercovici, and another one I did called Payback, that was with Tommy Howell and Joan Severance. We sort of sat on them, thought maybe they would have some, because we own them. They were self-financed, and we kind of made a mistake there, because now their value has, we thought that their value could only go up, and it's not happening that way, because there's so much new content. Now, it will circle back, but it is very hard to find, I mean, I was looking for movies, I love the movies. There was a great Yves Simino movie from you guys got to know this, where this it was an armored truck driver gets stuck in the back of his his truck, and they take and the truck is is the Frenchman. The truck is hijacked and taken to a garage, and this guy, who has no really skin in the game, just decides he's going to fight these guys through the holes and never let them in. Their whole plan goes to. It's an awesome movie. It was. I'll get you guys the name of it. I don't have it rough. It was a French movie. It was made in the 80s. It was all French, but at Tapestry, I wanted to remake it, and we pursued it, and just was in French are very difficult to deal with. Just, the French film business is very, very, it's. I mean, I'll come right out and say it's very snobbish, and and it was, and whatever we pursued, I remember the very frustrating experience, because we said this is a great movie to remake in English, and remake it in America, because it's Die Hard in an armored car. It's brilliant.
It sounds fantastic.
They made a brilliant movie, no doubt about it. There was no way we were going to improve it, but we would have made a version of it, because it was really good. And I say that in all modesty, because it was a great movie, and I didn't think I didn't think it would be as good as in English, but it didn't matter. We thought it was just could be a very appealing, and it was completely based on business, and and
maybe that was the problem with the pitch, because you're like, we want the rights, but we're not going to do it as good.
Well, that wasn't the pitch. That was the pitch. The pitch is we're going to give you honor and respect and all that. And listen, a French company came to us about Payback. I don't know if you guys ever saw that one, but
I've seen Payback quite a few times, actually.
Okay, so that's very there's a lot of appeal to French, and they wanted to do. The guys who were doing Emily, the show Emily in Paris, they came to us, and they wanted it for free, though. It was like, well, one, I'm a Writers Guild member, and I can't do that.
Right.
And two, I own it with two other guys who are, which is Robert Levy and Peter Abrams, and we own the movie, and they're not going to, they're not going to get anything from the, so they're hard to deal with, but. Anyways, I got to get you guys the name of that movie.
Yeah, please do.
It's really good. It's so hard to find. It was in the days when they were making like Diva and Monsieur Hair.
Diva is one of my favorite French noir films.
It's a brilliant film, and it's like so. Yeah, exactly. It was like that movie would hold up today. I mean, it really would.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm sure we could have a whole discussion on these movies that people need to see that maybe haven't been seen, because Diva is, but I want to back up a little bit. You briefly mentioned Luca Bercovici. Luca obviously is a friend of the show. We've had him on the show. Well, he's the reason why you're here. We want to talk about you. Okay. Because Luca's like, you got to get Sam on the show. And we're like, okay, let's do it. And finally you're here. I'm
thrilled too.
Yeah, no doubt. You're responsible for first of all, Rad, which is, we had Bill Allen on the show talking about Rad. But before we get into Rad,
still a very close friend of mine. I talk to him probably once a week. So just fantastic. So you know, we're very close.
On the phone?
We talk. No, and we have lunch. I mean, I don't want to go to Eagle Rock, but he comes to Santa Monica, and we have lunch.
Fair enough.
If we don't talk, we'll have lunch once a month. Yeah, Bill is great. I mean, I love Bill, and we have this connection from that movie and it just maintained. It's just amazing how he's a great guy. And
that's brilliant. That's fantastic to hear that you guys still.
So like two of my oldest and closest friends have been on your show, so I'm like thrilled to be here.
Oh, right on. Well, we're equally happy and thrilled to have you as well. But we want to, you got into this business at a very early age, right? Like, so
pretty early in my early 20s. Yeah, I mean that's early. Okay,
yeah,
that's early. I fell into it sort of. Wasn't like. I mean, I was very much, a product of the 70s, and there was the Vietnam War and protests, and that's when that's when I was in high school, and it was like, the fear of being drafted and all that kind of stuff. And so I was just kind of a screw around. I didn't like school too much. And however, I did my father was an actor, and he got moved here, and we moved, he came out here to do, because he had done 22 Broadway plays and done some movies. He was in Judgment at Nuremberg, and he did a movie called Murder Incorporated, which got him which is a great film. And so they moved him out here. He came out here to do a movie called Ice Station Zebra, and which is also really would be a great remake, I keep thinking. But I mean, it was not a good movie, but the premise was awesome. So so we moved out here, and basically a friend of his who was an actor, had a second house in the flats of Beverly Hills. So we moved into that for a while, and I ended up going to Beverly Hills High School. And to be honest, so I'll tell you this. The first real script I wrote was about my time at Beverly Hills High School. It was around the time Risky Business was out. And not that was actually the inspiration, but you get, it's infectious, right? Especially if you're young and you're hungry and you have this desire. I had been working as a production assistant, and then, it was so obvious to me that in those days, the writers had the power. They were still, as my agent said, the pimples on the ass of the world, but they still had the power. Yeah. Everything was story driven. Everything had to be. Each studio was developing 300 to 600 scripts a year. Can you believe that? Like, you're lucky if there's 100 developed. Of original stuff now. Crazy. It's very different. I mean, obviously with the streamers, it's coming around because and which is a great thing. Yes. I mean, original stuff is now coming back around, but it's still very hard. They're still looking for whoever had the last hit. So I mean, that sort of thing. Right. So actually, my first thing that I really got, well, there were two things. I mean, I worked for Luca's father, Eric, who had done Shogun, and Luca's father was a mentor to me. I mean, I would be sitting there because we were such good friends as kids. I was friends with him and Luca and his brother. We were all in so I loved talking to Eric, and he actually hired me. He had after he did Shogun, he got a great deal, and he put me in an office, and I had these two ideas for movies, none of which I was going to write. Actually, one was 315, and I found someone who was willing to develop the idea, and I talked to this friend of mine who was a writer named Michael Jacobs, and we ended up writing it ourselves. And the other one I had was called Baby Bucks, and it was about my time at Beverly Hills High School, and that was really my passion project because it was about like a kid, a fish out of water who comes to Beverly Hills and needs to find the money, to just to exist in that world. Yeah. Which is an inflated world. Totally. It's and so we started gambling casinos, which is what friends of mine and I were involved. We started blackjack games, and so I wrote a script about that and sold it immediately to Warner Brothers. And that really was the launch of my career. Unfortunately, Mark Rosenberg, who was president of Warner Brothers at the time, who was a legendary figure, was president of the SDS, with Students for the Democratic Society, which was a 60s activist group. The accused of Abby Hoffman, all those people were part of that group. Yeah. And Mark loved the project. And I mean, I just, there was an opening scene. It's a comedy. It was attempted to be a comedy. The opening scene was of a track meet, and these guys who had done laxative-filled cocaine in order to boost them, and they ended up shitting all over the track. And so that's the opening scene. And so Mark Rosenberg actually brings me into an office. Wow. The executive said, Mark wants to meet you. They had already bought it. He had never, he had approved it. They never bought it. So he looks at me and he goes, that opening scene is the funniest opening scene ever. He's this fat, guy with some big beard, and he's eating his lunch, and there's all kinds of crap in his beard. And I remember, and I was intimidated because he was such a massive figure. I mean, physically and in the business. And he's sitting there and he looks at me, and I'll never, this moment I can't ever forget, is that he said, yeah, I read your script. He says, that was the funniest opening scene I've ever read. He goes, the rest of it sucks. Go back and fix it. I mean, it was fine. It was like, I mean, it was definitely an approval there, you know.
Okay.
You know, it wasn't like, because it was a first draft, and so okay, that was, and unfortunately Mark died before we finished the second draft, because he was only 30 or 33 or something like that. And but he was just very, he had high stress. I mean, he was a screamer. I mean, what I told you, he said, I mean, he really screamed it at me. So, you know, and I'm 22, 24, something like that, you know. I don't know what and I'm like sitting here before this guy who had already approved the script, and they bought it. And then, you know, so I'm in there. Unfortunately, he passed away, and he got replaced by someone else, and they put the script in turnaround. And so I don't even know where, I don't even have a copy today, but it would be nice so I could find it. I did the rewrite, you know, did our due diligence, but there was no champion behind it at that point. And that's very important in the business, is that if you don't have someone championing your story, especially in those days in the studio system, you're dead in the water, basically.
Well, and so Baby Bucks, unfortunately,
it's just knows? In the ether someplace. I have no.
But you were able to. But you said you had two scripts at the same time. You had 315 moments.
Yeah, 315. Yeah, 315 was something that we ended up like I was going to hire this guy Michael Jacobs through another company to, you know, and then decided just, you know what, let's just write it. And so Michael and I sat down and we pounded out a draft, and we got it out there, and we got it out to a few people we knew. In those days, you kind of knew where to go. It was even if you weren't. I mean, I think I had an agent at that time, but I wasn't. You know, I think it was more like we were just going to the people we knew that we could pitch. And so we had offers pretty quickly on that. We actually made some money on it, and then the options expired, and then ended up in sort of a thing. And there was one situation which was, I'll just tell you. So Sean Cunningham got hold of the script and said, I want to do something like this, but I don't want to do this. Okay.
Oh, boy.
So obviously
he made New Kids.
Right. So exactly. Wow. I mean, you know this. It's amazing when I hear that, because who knows this story? We actually went in through like my good friend Randy Feldman, who had done Tango and Cash, and he did Metro, and he was a writer, and him and Dennis, his brother Dennis, did the great horror series with Nastasia I'm sorry. Yes, Dennis Feldman did that. So it was Dennis and Randy who actually got it to Sean Cunningham, and he said, I want to do this, and we're going to pay you like I forgot how they put it, but it was like morality money, right? Good morality money. They offered us money, something like a lot of money for the time, like $30,000 or something like that.
Okay. And
at the same time, we had offers to make the movie. And so I remember speaking to a lawyer saying, well, he goes, and I go, well, can they just take this? And he goes, well, if your movie gets made, then there's really no damages. And then, and then what are you going to do? Pay all this money, right? So we said no, and got the movie made for far less money than we would have gotten had we done that. And Sean went ahead and made his movie anyway, which was New Kids. I give him all the credit. I really do. I mean, they, obviously maybe it was because of the Feldmans or something like that. And they, they were really, because, Dennis and Randy were very hot writers coming up and producers. And so I think that was the thing. But so that was, and 315 we got made, and a guy named Sandy Kleiman, came aboard as an he had a small company, and wrote the check, and made the movie, and my agent at the time was a guy named Ken Gross, and his brother was Larry Gross. So they they wanted. It was always talked about. This is a great script for a young Walter Hill, right? And Walter Hill was my hero, as I told you. Was
one of
just. Yeah, I mean, just I love Walter Hill, and I
know
mean,
we do too. Yeah,
anything he does, bad or good, I love. Because he made some bad movies, but he's made great movies. So and so Walter came on as as Larry's. Larry was his protege, and Walter came on as an uncredited executive producer
for 315.
Yes, and I got this, and he came to the screenings. He came to see the cuts and give notes, and that was basically his thing. And everyone was going to listen to him, because here we are doing this very cheap movie, and you get a great guy like Walter at the time was very hot, and I got to sit and talk to him. So it was which was such a treat.
That's really cool. That's I will tell you 315 is I like to call them teens in peril movies. There's a it's like a subgenre that I'm a huge fan of. Tough Turf would be one.
Tough Turf was I love Tough Turf. Class of
1984. Yeah.
And they were all lumped together. They were all. There was a genre for sure. And not. I mean, 315 came about because this was again Luca's father, Eric. I had written one script. I had written some television ideas or something, but I wasn't really writing screenplays. So I asked Eric, who was a seasoned writer, had done some huge things. Great movie called Hell in the Pacific, and that was Luca's father, and just he did a lot of stuff, and he was and he had this great deal. He had done Shogun and Noble House, and I was his boy. I had an office, and I actually found a project for him called The Gold Crew, which he did as a TV movie. But I said to him, so what do you do, Eric? Because I really was curious. I was very young, and he said, you basically just find your favorite story, favorite movie, and just put different clothes on it, right? So I was like, okay. I had been to like a summer film class of some kind somewhere, and they had shown some classic movies, and that's where I fell in love with High Noon. And I fell in love with that story, the existentialism. So as soon as he said that, I go, well, High Noon in an urban high school sounds like exactly the thing he's talking about, because and that's what we did. Unfortunately, 3 O'Clock High was made, and it always gets confused,
Right. Very different.
It's a different movie. Yeah, it's a different movie, So, but I mean, so that was the genesis of 315. Sean Cunningham didn't do that story. I mean, he did some aberration of that story.
He did. He took, it's, I guess, I don't want to call it formulaic, but there's the idea of like a teen gang, right? And so you can have your different stories in there. And 315 is unique in the sense like Adam Baldwin was not, he was in My Bodyguard, obviously, but he wasn't this kind of star vehicle for him was, I hadn't seen anything like this when I saw it as a kid. I remember renting this movie when I was a kid, and then it got re-released on Blu-ray about a couple of years ago, maybe about a year
ago. Did it really? I don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, you should maybe get some residuals for that.
Maybe,
movie, right? But I introduced it to Dustin. I told Dustin about it on the other podcast I do, Podcasting After Dark. I broke it down scene by scene, and so I paid a lot of love to it. A lot of love went to Wings Hauser being in it for.
He was great. Well, I mean, Wings was great. Well, that whole experience was really, really. I mean, it was tense because it was really hard to get that movie to do it for the money that was allocated towards it. And honestly, Larry was probably in over his head, but he did it. He found his way through it. He was great too in that he only rewrote things that he was passionately thought that needed to be rewritten.
Okay.
And he always ran it by us, I mean, he ran it by me, and he was classy like that, anybody, he had a big job to do because he had never directed before. And and it was, you're dealing with young actors who are not, who are a little bit, do they
Green.
remember their blocking? And,
Right.
does that, I mean, I think he had some, he had a lot to deal with. He had a cinematographer who barely spoke English, so
That's hard.
it was an experience. And, I thought it came out, the script really got a lot of great coverage, and people really there was a lot of interest in the script. It read really tense. I'm not sure how tense the movie was, but because I saw it a little differently than it, and it's very hard to do that. It's really hard to be anywhere subjective on something that you've written has then gone through a filter of someone else.
Yes.
It's hard. I mean, I'm not, and I'm going to get into that on Rad, because that's important to me, because of, because I have my notes, because I went through your thing, and then, I'm going to, I mean, we can segue to that now. Yeah, 315 was an incredible experience. Meeting and sitting with Walter Hill. I was officially a produced writer.
That's huge.
It was amazing, right? I had already had the gig at Warner's. But I mean, that, they had already optioned the script, but, it's different. It's different. Yes. I mean, much more money from Baby Bucks than 315, 10 times the money. That was the bidding war, actually, between 20th Century Fox and Warner's. Wow. They ended up paying a lot of money for Baby Bucks, because it was just such a, and Mark Rosenberg wanted it because of that scene, I think.
Yeah.
And so, but it's different. So I had like 6 months of being like, I got a deal at Warner Brothers. That finally, and you're 23, 24 years old, whatever you're doing. And I'm like, okay, cool, and then 315 gets made, which I was confident it would get made. It was just, there was so many people circling. There was a guy named Bruce Cohn Curtis. I'm sure that name rings a bell. He was, very interested in, and then Dennis Brody, who was the guy who actually really pushed it through with, I guess, I can't remember the name of the company, Dakota or something like that, which Sandy did. And that was 315. And I guess a couple years, what happened was I literally, I've told the story before. I don't know how important it is for this, because there's other things I want to do, but Rad came up because I was driving home. I lived in Hollywood. I lived in Robert Levy's guest house up in Sunset Plaza. And I was coming home from Venice, and I saw these kids on BMX bikes. Now I'm like probably 23, 24 at the time. I'm a lot older than them. And I see these guys just fly, seriously. And I'm like, so I stopped my car. I don't know what it is. I don't have any agenda in mind, right? But I stop my car and I go and I talk to these guys. They want nothing to do with me, really. They're just, oh, well, I don't know. We're just hitting air, man. And, that's kind of like the, well, I don't know.
Weird 24-year-old.
Right, exactly. I don't know what hitting air means. I don't know but it looked just like nothing I had seen. These kids, I was a Stingray rider, so I loved bicycles. I was, nice. and as you guys talked about, the one thing I loved what you guys said, and it's true. And in my pitch for other stuff is that I think one of the enduring things about Rad is the bicycle thing, because bicycles to most people are a seminal moment. The first time you ride a bike and you're actually doing it without a parent or without training wheels, you have found freedom that you hadn't experienced before. Most people. It's a seminal moment in people's lives. And I think that there's a part of Rad that represents that, and that, good or bad, the movie, that is, I think it's a trigger, and and other bicycle movies as well, but I think with Rad, it actually plays to that. I can't tell you that was any kind of a fuel behind it, but it, in retrospect, I think it's such a big moment. I remember I grew up in New York, as I said, and moved to California not when I was maybe 10 years old, and so I didn't really ride a bike until then. It was very hard to ride bikes in New York as a kid.
Sure.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, so I remember that first moment when I was able to go on a two-wheeler, and that was a great moment. And I think that's really, that is, and I love that you guys brought that up. I actually, I in your in the John Farnham episode, you guys will recognize that, and that was, that, I love that you guys did that.
But I think you said that we got some things wrong, or we omitted.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, for behind the curtain, Sam had reached out to us, and he's like, when we were talking about having you on the show, you're like, yeah, I want to come on because I want to talk about some things you mentioned in that episode. I'm like, let's do it. Let's talk about it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're only start. Justin. Okay.
Whoa, you like named him out.
Oh, this is great.
I have a whole list here.
Oh shit.
So first is a cult movie. Let me tell you what Wikipedia calls a cult movie. Is as commonly referred to as a cult classic is a film that has acquired a cult following. Cult films are known for their dedicated, passionate fan base, which forms an elaborate subculture, members of which engage repeated viewings, dialogue quoting. Okay, so you said it's not quite a cult movie, but this says it is.
Well, okay, so I'll elaborate on that though, because
it's a subculture. It's the BMX culture. It's and it's passed on. And you guys know it was released in theaters in October, in this past October. Did you guys hear about that? Right?
Yes.
It did $400,000. It came.
It was insane. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. I mean, and Bill and I went together to a theater. I mean, people are just, they're just. They know all the lines to the movie. I mean, I don't see how you can call it a cult movie. That's a cult classic, because this defines it, because it is an elaborate subculture, members of which are engaged in repeated viewings, dialogue quoting, and audience participation. I guarantee you that a lot of people went out and bought BMX bikes because of Rad once it hit the video stores.
For sure. Yes, absolutely. I'm trying to recall exactly what we had talked about.
Believe me, I'm just having fun with you.
Well, but was it the definition of?
Yeah, you said it's not quite a cult movie. He goes, I guess you were like, you kind of said that, Okay. And so anyway, of course, I remember
my contextualizing of it, because certainly has it lived on in cult status? Absolutely.
It's fine. I'm just having I mean, I just it was like okay, let me tell them, look at this is anyway.
Yeah, that's what this is our version of $2 questions on us, I
guess. So the elevator pitch, Zach, right? It took you a long time to get to it. Let me tell you what the elevator pitch to Rad is. It took you a long time, man. I'm like,
I know it did. It always takes me a long time to get to everything.
It's Rocky on a bike, okay? I mean,
okay, fine.
What more do you have to say?
Fine.
It's just, it's Rocky on a bike. Come on.
I like mine.
Yeah, right. I mean, gee whiz.
That's why I was a teacher, for crying out loud.
All right. Well,
film business.
Yeah, because you have to. You need 40 minutes to go into a class, and
trust me, my son says I talk too much sometimes.
All teachers do, right?
It's amazing.
Clearly, like the sound of my own voice.
Like,
so Bill's wardrobe.
Yeah, come on. Okay,
Bill's wardrobe. Brown. I have no defense.
Yes,
I have nothing to say about it.
Right, you didn't write that.
Other than
only wears brown.
Other than we were up in Canada and we had to use Canadian kind of. And what I've noticed, I traveled the world a little bit making movies and stuff. Yeah. And I've noticed that, a lot of foreign countries have their own interpretation of what hip America is.
Brown has never been hip.
Well, I mean, it depends. I guess it depends. We were up in Calgary, Canada. It's a very conservative, town. It's basically the Old West. And, I don't know, but, that was it. Also, Hal Needham wasn't exactly, look, an example. I love Hal Needham. Nothing will ever match that experience for me to working with Hal Needham. He's a terrific guy. He was a wonderful, and he made the movie and he wasn't sure how he was going to ever make this movie. The first thing he said to me when I pitched it to him, well, because I got Robert Levy, I made him take me in to see Hal Needham. I go, and he goes, I blow up shit. I drive big fast cars. I don't know shit about bicycles. So again, I've told this story, and I said, will you come to Griffith Park and look at this exhibition that they're having on Saturday. Okay, he said. And so he goes, we all go, Robert and I and Hal go, and he watches what I had seen on, on 23rd and Olympic, or wherever I was when I saw those kids. And he looks and he just nods his head. This is great, right? This I can do this, right? He can, so we never basically had to come up with a story, which is where I really wanted to get to about the story, because
I just want to say one quick thing, because it just popped in my head, because we've never done this before. We've never kind of revisited an episode in a way with someone a part of the film, and like you are, and this is beautiful. I love this. But I'm realizing now, because he's dressed in like that taupe brown throughout the whole thing. In Megaforce, most of the good guys, right? Megaforce, they're in like kind of brownish spandex. So maybe Hal has this thing. Maybe he told his costume designer, "I like the color brown. Just do brown."
Dull brown.
I'm speculating.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can also tell you that like there was a lot of things, like the movie, like we found another guy to play Crew, and it was Robert Downey Jr., and he wanted to do the movie. And I mean, he had just done Weird Science, and we were able to go see Universal let us see a piece, and we thought, and Hal just didn't connect with him. And he really loved Bill for the role, and I think the movie came out to be what it is today because of Hal. And I don't think you can push a guy too far, even though he was very open to relying on my youth to be, to inform him and help him. He didn't like the fact that Downey was wearing an earring when he came.
Interesting.
He was listen, it was the Reagan years. It was all that. I'm sure he was, Hal walking around with a big American, nothing wrong,
Right.
I mean, but he just, you can't also, he needed to do the movie, his, what he believed in and that kind of, and I think that was one thing that there was a conflict, but, also, like talking about the SATs and that whole thing, right?
Yes.
So the original script, let me tell you, Balls Out, right, was about a kid who was going to graduate high school, was very poor, lived with a drunken old mother, who wasn't very nice, not very loving, and he was going to graduate high school. And he didn't want to because he feared going off into the world, which is something I related to. Yes. I was the same way, and I think a lot of people did. Totally. And that was the first draft. I wrote the first draft Jeffrey came on after I wrote that's another thing I want to get to, the which I think you guys just totally missed is how important and integral the paper route is. But anyway, we'll get to that.
I love it.
This is the one, because that's the favorite sequence, my favorite sequence in the movie, and because I think it sets it up, in such a way that it's the only thing that could have set up the movie to make it work. Not saying you guys don't have points, but in the movie world, it really
our points takes. Are I understand.
It's just right. How else is it? Like you said, this guy's not going to be. He's not a trained writer. Okay, right. Well, neither was Rudy or some of those other guys, and they were all horrible at what they did. And Rocky was a club fighter, basically a paper boy, right?
True,
so anyway, that's another thing. But so the original thing, there was no SATs. That wasn't ever going to be a part of it. That was not in my mind, not in the original 94-page script that that I wrote and that got greenlit. Okay, it was basically he was a rebel. He was a rebel, but he was a fun rebel. There wasn't a dance sequence in that. There wasn't. It was a little harder edged. His duels with the cop were much more serious. The cop was looking to put him away. And that was, and it was scene for scene, it was similar, but the character was different, and we were just forced to just change the whole thing, to to this thing when and as you guys point out, it makes no sense. You can take the SATs anytime, and you can do, I mean, it totally makes no sense, right? But and I know that when Jack Schwartzman sort of kind of came to me and said, this is where the way it's going to be. I mean, it was like, do I fight it or do I just go along with it? Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you do? And, and I kind of knew that just knowing who Hal was. I mean, Robert Levy and I were basically on the same page, and he had a lot to say, but, Jack and Talia were the producers and the financiers, and, the buck stops there. And also, I was sure Hal was going to take their side. There's no doubt about it. That's Hal's sensibility, was to make a very sweet. I didn't set out to make a sweet movie. To be honest, I can be honest with it. I set out to make a movie, a gritty kind of, not as gritty as like 315 gritty, but to make a movie that was, that I wanted it to have a family appeal, but I wanted that. It was very important to me that this kid was really conflicted about moving on in life. I thought that was going to be a really, something that kids of that age were going to plug into. And it was, and I was very tuned into that. And I didn't really fight for it, and whatever. It's probably, if it had been, it would have just gone on the wayside, and would have been another. It would have been another teen angst movie, whereas this became something that was like, So, I mean, who am I to know? But I'm just like, you guys were totally right about that. And also fitting in. I mean, there was always going to be the guy, the boss, the Duke Best character, the boss, but that was also, that was played way down. And it was really, there was a subplot between the Ray Walston character and him, where they had been partners and they split up, and there was a feud between them. And that doesn't even play anymore, right? In the movie, unfortunately, because there was some solid foundation for that, of why they're giving each other the finger and all that stuff. I mean, and have those lines, and how Ray Walston really, he says, this kid is knocking my coffee over every day. He's doing this, but God, he has heart, and that's kind of like, like someone showing belief in this kid, and that is very karate kiddish, right? Totally. And that was the original script, and that was the story. And I just, what can you do? Again, it might not have played the way it came out, and it didn't do well. I mean, it tanked, in the box office.
But I think you made a good point about, the changes being made and what has kept it maybe to this day. Clearly, to this day, there's a love for Rad.
Absolutely. I'm not going to say I was right. It was just, someone, it was Robert Levy has always said to me, because I've worked with him now many times, and he's very smart and he's a good producer. And he's always says to me, no one cares what you like. No one cares what Sam Bernard likes. What they care about is what works for a story. And that's very true. And that's why I approach writing as a craft as opposed to an art. It's a craft, and a craft means that there's a definite, there are elements to it. And, I would never get beyond a formula writer. Like writing Payback was like a real challenge to me, because it was like, I love the genre. I mean, my favorite genre was film noir. So that took years to write. I mean, from, what's a year? I mean, I started it probably a little bit after Rad, and didn't get it made for 3 or 4 years, but did draft after draft after draft after draft. I remember at one point I had a manager who said, you've written the sheen, you've polished the sheen right off this script, because I kept, and finally actually went back to an earlier draft and then got it set up, but that was the thing, is that that it's a craft, and you're also not writing a movie, you're writing a screenplay. It's a different animal, and the screenplay gets put in the hands of a director, and that was Hal. And it was the most fun I've ever had making a movie. It was, you can imagine how much fun making that movie was. It was so much fun. And I'm sure Bill will attest to that, and anyone where we just had the time of our lives. It was just so much fun.
Well, it's a light. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say this is just so illuminating, and I really appreciate that. That you're basically taking what we've said and
well, yeah, no, that was let me see if I have anything.
That.
Okay, so the other thing I have to correct because it wouldn't be fair is Hal did not shoot the opening or the end credits.
Oh,
okay.
That was shot by John Schwartzman.
Oh,
who was, of course, turned into be one of the biggest cinematographers, and who's Jack's son, the producer. And John was a big ally of mine. Like, John completely agreed with my first script, and like we would always go into Jack and say, "Hey, Jack, this is wrong. We can't change this." John was my ally. But he shot both that stuff, and that actually and Hal Needham actually said, "This looks better than anything I can do." I mean, he was very, very complimentary towards it. And so, yeah, I just, I know that you guys mentioned that. And I agree that Thunder in the Heart was the best song. And I love John Farnham. He was such a trooper. He came to LA for like 3 days and I spent time with him while he was recording these songs. And he was kind of a perfectionist and making sure, his voice had to be just right. And, he liked to go in and diddle with the, himself and, with the levels and, and those were great. And those were great songs, I'm both of them. I'd agree with that. I thought Thunder in Your Heart is great. It was my favorite song in the movie.
Well, I'm a little biased, I suppose, because I live pretty close to the beach and we're down at the beach all the time. And I see a lot of, especially on the weekends, groups of BMX bicyclists, not just kids, but adults as well.
Oh, sure.
And one said, I think it said Rad Crew. And so I'm a little biased to the thinking that, it's such a big part of our culture, but you talking about, that moment where kids get on a bike and realize that they can do this on their own, that freedom. This was a lightning in a bottle movie. And there's not many other, other movies have come out that have bicycles in them. But this is very specific to this,
I think that addresses it without, again, it wasn't the intention. I wish it was, but I think that it just addressed it in just the natural storytelling of a guy wanting, being attached to his bicycle and that being his future. So I think that, that's where it came from. And it's just, it is true. I mean, and you look at the electric bike revolution, it's just continuing. Bicycles will always be there. They will probably become the preferred mode of transportation in many cases. They're very much last mile, forms of transportation that cities have set up,
Right. Yeah.
When there's no parking in an area, they find parking, then they provide electric bikes for the last mile, that's, whatever is left.
Right.
That's been a thing, so, I mean, I'm not saying Rad had anything to do with that, but I think what Rad touched that nerve, I think. And I think that's a big reason why it came out. Also, the fact that kids just were able, as opposed to like, how are you going to go do that? Yeah, you can go play a pickup football game, but kids could also go out and try to be Crew Jones.
Yes.
They could, all you needed was a bicycle and a half pipe or a piece of plywood. And I think that also had a lot to do with it. Just, they could be Crew Jones, and his
and paper route. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it just popped in my head too, thinking about, because obviously, we have, we love music and we love playing music to things. And you can't, I guess you could play music in your earbuds, playing baseball or football or basketball or whatever. But when you're on your bike and you're doing your own thing and you've got your music on, it's like you're in your own world. And then there's something
right. So I wrote the paper route to listening, and I listened to the song every time I would sit down. It probably took me 2 or 3 days to write that. And it was to Jump by Van Halen. And when we first put the 10 track in, we used that, and it was so great. I hated the score to the movie, but whatever, I fought it like crazy, but it was
attached. Yeah.
I hated it. I just
Yeah.
hated. I mean, I just I
you're
was
just like, I just hated it regardless.
Yeah,
It wasn't
I
even like
don't.
you wanted to
Yeah,
jump. Yeah. Right.
I love Jump. I just
Yeah.
but the score when the guy came on, he said, "Oh, I'm going to do a rockin' score." Well, it's not very rockin' if you ask me. But I do want to straighten out one. So in there are certain things you want to attach to other popular what's going on, current popular things that are going on, right? So and they might not have anything to do with each other, but if you're smart and greedy and you want success and you will find a way to make some association. So you guys are music guys. There was a very popular song out right around when right before Rad came out that had Christian in the title.
As in Sister Christian?
Sister Christian?
Night Ranger, Sister Christian, and that is why she was named. You guys were going on, who is this Christian? Why is she named Christian? Well, I don't know any girls named Christian. Well, I knew one girl, and that was Sister Christian. And that was my choice to name her Christian that reason, because we thought, well, it was a huge song, right?
Yeah,
it was just,
totally.
And we were never going to get
interesting
to be able to do it, right? But we wanted that association as, it's a flyer, why not, right?
Yeah.
She's Christian, and let's just, let's see if we can somehow associate that with, that song.
Interesting.
I love
there
that.
You go.
Okay.
There you go. That's the answer to that one.
I'm totally okay with that. I'm totally okay with that. Well, first of all, having you on our show from a movie that was from 40 years ago, specifically Rad, and shows the staying power if you write something, even if there were some changes in there, clearly, it stays with you. And to this day, we're grateful that you made that movie.
Oh yeah, listen, and also, I did execute the rewrite. So it was like, I absolutely executed the rewrite. It was painful in a lot of ways. And there was, there were, when I say I gave in, it was, maybe I could have said I'm walking away, but I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
I resisted for sure, but it didn't matter. So I appreciate that. And listen, the Rad fans are amazing. And I'm sure they love, there's, I don't know how really big it is. I know the numbers are great, but I think that, they're rabid as hell. So, there's a lot of social media presence. And it's amazing how this movie has just lived on, it just continues to this day, thinking that it got released in all those theaters. That was, when I heard that and I heard the take, I was just like, what?
Amazing.
Wow.
We could have you on all day, and we definitely would have you back for sure to talk more about movies and some of your other projects.
Love that.
Yeah, that'd be great. I love you guys, and I love the, I don't know if you can cut that, but I thought of a couple other people. I'm sure you've thought of like Jack Scalia. He was great. He was like, you know who he is, right? So he was basically in the 90s, every movie we did that had a male lead, he was considered for, and we never worked with him, but I remember meeting him several times, and he was a great guy. And I thought, like, I guess he has some legacy from the 80s. Thank you so much, and all the back and forth. It was really fun. The only other note was, I agree with that. I thought Longest Yard is my favorite Burt Reynolds movie too.
There you go. That's to be continued for sure.
Okay, thanks guys.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.